that's the kind of angle you need. Is you need unique experts, those who have a big, digital footprint, those who kind of like basically ran out the EEAT, those who know what they're talking about, have years of experience. The better the expert, the better. Not that, you know, a doctor at a local clinic won't have as anything to add to a piece of content, but if we have doctors, for example, that write content for Drug Watch, uh, we're looking at those doctors at Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, those that are professors at Harvard. So by really honing in on the expert voice, those are the people that I think that the audience is generally going to gravitate to, and that's how you can, you know, distinguish yourself from the rest of the AI slop that comes out. Now, AI can, like I said, serve its place, but it should not be the authoritative voice on any piece of content. It can enhance, it can guide, but yeah, you have to make sure you have real people, real voices.
Well, welcome everybody back to the Full Battery Media Podcast. I've got an awesome guest with me today. Now, would you like to tell people who you are and what you do?
I am Michael Santiago. I am the senior content editor and digital public relations specialist for drugwatch.com.
Now, how did you get into this path of creating content and working for Drug Watch?
It was actually quite a long road. So I work for a marketing company that owns and operates a couple of websites in the finance, legal, and medical sectors. So basically, I was hired on initially as a senior content editor that was in charge of handling the EEAT of the brand building. It eventually snowballed into public relations. I was handling external content calendars, handling a large network of external freelancers. So really, my initial journey started in the finance realm for the same company, launched that. So I was basically in charge of handling all content, and the websites are annuity.org and Retire Guide. So basically, I was in charge of handling all the content, all the evergreen content, news, blog posts, stories from people affected by a lot of financial products. It eventually snowballed into working for the Drug Watch brand, which is basically it talks about a lot of litigation around faulty medical devices, drugs. And really, I would say the evolution of my exact role within the brand is, it really just kind of snowballed. I've basically work in a unique space where I, own and operate a content plan for the website Drug Watch. But as needs arose, I was able to, flex some of that creative muscle as a creator into unique verticals. One of those being the public relations space. So now I also make, I would say, public relations style content so that we can get it, get backlinks, get brand mentions, and top tier publications. So it's been a very unique road going from finance to, the medical legal sector. But yeah, I would say, as a content creator, I have just been, anything that comes up that's in, that I can lend my expertise to. It's always a unique opportunity, and it can always cross over with different paths. For example, starting off as an editor, ending up in public relations, and it just goes from there.
It does, man. It's awesome though, because sometimes the best journeys are not like a straight line, and we get to learn awesome, fun things as we go. And, it kind of sounds like that's what you're describing. But, you do have such a wealth of knowledge in content creation. It just leads me to think of some different questions. And there was one that I've been coming back to because someone asked it of me recently, and I wanted to ask it to other people. Like, now, if you had to start as a content creator with like 0 followers today, what's the first thing that you would lock in before you posted anything?
I think you really got to know your audience. And you really got to know your competition, because, those are two separate, distinct things. Like, some of the competition out there might write things or create content in such a way that it just speaks to the general audience. And a lot of the audience, especially coming into the your money, your life space with finance or medical or legal, they often want to hear and see content that speaks directly to them that they can relate to. So I would say starting over, and it's just kind of general advice for anybody in the content space. Um, really know your audience. Really know that you know the unique voice matters. That you have to create content that relates directly to the end user. You can't make them feel like you know I'm sure like a lot of users that come to the site aren't aware of like the marketing terms like lead gen or anything like that, but you got to make them feel more than just a customer. And so really creating content, from scratch, from the ground up, knowing what the competitors are doing. Cause like I said, a lot of competitors, especially really big websites might just speak to the general audience. So you really got to know like what's going to make your voice stand apart from the crowd.
I love that too, because and what's going to make your voice stand apart is it's really important to know who you're selling to. Like if you haven't figured that out, I was cracking up about that the other day because I was driving with my daughter and we saw a couple businesses. Um, and one of the ones that we drove past, I love Mexican food. I love it. Probably one of my favorite foods, man. Grew up in Southern California, so we had some of the best like Mexican restaurants near my house. Like just the best taco trucks. We had this place that made the bomb burritos, man. It was so good. And all authentic stuff. Now, here in Vietnam, I drove past this new restaurant called Taco Leo, and it was completely empty. And I was like, that's just a crime, man. Because I ate there and it's really good food. Like I was blown away. I was like, wow, they're doing that in Vietnam. This is amazing. But like the audience here wasn't into it because that wasn't a taste that they were used to and wanted. And talked to my wife and I was like, what could that place change that might do something different? And we started thinking about the different foods that might be able to cross over. And the one that we just kept coming back to was churros. And it's something that the Vietnamese audience would just be all about. It's sweet, it's fried, it's crispy. It's like you could have it with whatever, and it's just delicious. Now, if those people that were opening that restaurant thought about their audience a little bit more, they might be able to think about, well, hang on, who are we selling to? Because if you know who you're selling to and what you're, or creating content for, will have a better idea of what to create. And it doesn't mean that you have to only make what they want, but it's if you're starting a business, you do kind of want people to tune in. If you're starting or by content, you do want people to tune in. If you're starting a business, you want people to show up and buy your product. And again, if you do not know who you're selling to, that's going to be a hard sell on anything, because you're going to maybe make too much, make something for everyone. And that doesn't always work as well also.
No, absolutely. That's a great analogy for that too. I mean, it really is. If you think of it as a recipe, some people like spicy food, some people like something bitter, and while you can create, Thanksgiving just happened yesterday, of course, in the States, so you can make the traditional Thanksgiving food, and it typically will please most people. But if you're having like a couple of guests over for dinner, it's an entirely different story because you have to get the unique
Yep.
taste, understand the palate of each person that comes over. So it's a similar approach with content. I mean, we can have the topical evergreen content that of course like leads people through a funnel to their specific journey, but yeah, you have to understand like exactly who you're speaking to, who's going to come to this website even before the website is launched, before the
Yep.
content's created.
Right.
Otherwise it's going to be ineffective. You might end up in the SERPs, but you won't exactly be able to pull people in, whereas other sites that might be doing it better, creating better content would.
Yeah. Well, and it is once you start figuring out those things, who you're selling to. And again, I love that you talk about the competition because, you can start looking at what they're doing, and starting to figure out how they're doing it, what they're doing well, what's working, and maybe what's not. And if you can figure out that, you can figure out your unique spin. And that's one of the things too. Like I have someone that works with me that I help him create his podcast. And he is just wild and all over the place. And the thing is like he's super authentic. And people are just tuning in for it because they're here for that all day. But everyone's screaming be authentic, but what does authenticity look like in 2025? Because, right now, I mean, there's a ton of people that are leaning in on AI, and I love AI too, and it gives me some great ideas and great questions to ask. But at the same time, how do we keep things authentic, so it doesn't sound like, someone had AI write their script, you know?
Absolutely, yeah, and that's actually one of my specialties within my job, within the brands that I work for. So, yeah, AI has taken over faster than I think most of us like to admit. It feels like it cropped up 2 years ago, and now it's seeped into every corner of the internet, into our lives. It's a great tool. It's great when you merge it or marry it with human creativity, but you can't solely rely on it, especially when websites that are trying to outrank each other, trying to end up number one, two, or three in a SERPs. You have to really deliver content that is still human driven, it's human censored. And one of the best ways that we do it over at Drug Watch, especially in the your money, your life space, is we have to have experts on board. Of course, like one angle of it is we have to adhere to Google guidelines because a lot of the content that we write about has to have those with credentials, those that work in a space. But there's a way in which I would say doctors, lawyers, financial advisors, people I've worked with on the various brands, um, they write in a way, and most of these people, I should say, are not typically writers. So you can, as an editor, you have to clean it up a bit, of course, just you get deliverable and make it go live on a site. But that's the kind of angle you need is you need unique experts, those who have a big, digital footprint, those who kind of like basically ran out the EEAT, those who know what they're talking about, have years of experience. The better the expert, the better. Not that, you know, a doctor at a local clinic won't have this, anything to add to a piece of content. But, if we have doctors, for example, that write content for Drug Watch, uh, we're looking at those doctors at Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, those that are professors at Harvard. So by really honing in on the expert voice, those are the people that I think that the audience is generally going to gravitate to. And that's how you can, you know, distinguish yourself from the rest of the AI slop that comes out. Now, AI can, like I said, serve its place, but it should not be the authoritative voice on any piece of content. It can enhance, it can guide, but yeah, you have to make sure you have real people, real
100%.
voices.
100%, man. And it's one of the things that's interesting is we are getting better tools and people are able to tap into these. But like you said, like there has to be the humanity behind it. Like financial content. I do a financial podcast and I talk to all these people. And one of the interesting things is I see a lot of financial content coming out and people are saying the exact same thing, man, and just spitting it out. But like, I want to hear like, okay, this is how I, da, 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 or you should do this and this and this. But it's like, you know, and this is how I did it. Okay, now that's interesting. This is how I paid down student loans while working three jobs. Okay, that's something that AI can't talk to me about. It's like AI's never worked three jobs and, raised two kids type of a thing. And so I think that like if you can kind of anchor things in your own experience, it's always good. But, I mean, again, it's like any tool. If you can use that tool in the right way, it's a powerful thing. Now, are there any storytelling tricks that, small creators can start tapping into so they look like they're, kind of bigger than they actually are?
Sure, yeah. I would say there's a lot of opportunities to, really pull from AI without having to basically have it write for you and come up with every single idea. But a way that basically people could use AI to generate some content to look bigger than they are. Um, it's great for like competitor analysis. It's a quick, easy snapshot. Although you have to eventually get to a point with the prompts in AI or ChatGPT, for example, to basically kind of spit out exactly what you're looking for. But you can use it to scour the web to see what other competitors are doing in the space. And then also from there, you can, let's say you have a pre existing site, it's slowly growing, you don't have too much content on there. You can basically do a cross comparison with what's out there in the market and in the competitor space, and then also what the gaps are on your side of things. And from there, it can honestly it can spit out some really good ideas. It also does social listening. It sees what's out there, what's being talked about in the media, what could gain traction with reporters. Um, so it's good for those kind of things. Like if you're trying to get a quick snapshot really quick without having spent hours doing your own research, you can really do that. But it's also good just for ideas in general. Like let's say you're running a financial site, you're trying to get it bigger. Um, it could be one of those general type of websites in the finance space or something even smaller. For example, the website I worked on in the finance space was annuity.org. So very niche annuities. But, sometimes you kind of like hit a ceiling. Like, let's say you're writing a very niche, running a very niche website and it's all about 401ks. You're going to hit a ceiling eventually about, how much content you can actually deliver, what's going to make it unique, what's going to make it stand out. So using AI to you know, basically scour your own website and kind of figure out what those gaps are, like what are some unique angles. You can really pull a lot of unique content, especially when, like I said, you merge it or marry it with, the competitor analysis, the social listening. Um, and from there, like you can really figure out, what the direction should be. And I would also say another way in which I've used it is that it also can compile a list very quickly of some top tier, you know, if you're running a small website, you're probably going to want freelance writers or freelance editors. It can find some very top tier people, give you their LinkedIn profiles, give you their emails most of the time. It's almost scary, but yeah, you could go from there and find some really top quality talent to help inform the content.
Well, it's interesting because and there is this game that everyone's playing in content that's trying to play to the algorithms, right? You
Uh,
know, but they change every couple minutes, It's like whatever is trending is just it's there and it's gone. Like, do you think that it's better to make more evergreen content or is it better to try to like surf the trends? Which one do you think is a better move for creators or for brands?
that's a good, interesting question. Yeah, it's also it's a bit nuanced, I would say, for each, of course. I would say starting off, if you have a brand that you're trying to build, evergreen content, and also adding in those personal stories of, like you mentioned, how a financial product is going to be explained better through a human, and basically they will say, oh, they work two jobs to get afford this much, and they put this much aside, whereas AI can't relate to that at all.
No.
Having that type of content, whether it's like its own piece or it's peppered into an evergreen article, is really powerful. I think to help build the brands because people want to, like I said at the very beginning, like want to see the connection to themselves.
Yeah.
Uh, Whereas the other side of it, stuff that's trending. If you want to focus on brand promotion and brand building, that's probably where you would have to focus on and lean on is you'd have to build content that is basically like being talked about, like Ozempic, for example, or any kind of these GLP-1 drugs that are out there. It's been trending for a while. So you're going to want to see like, okay, CNN's writing about it or some other big brands writing about it. And basically, you got to figure out the angle on how you're going to get yourself in there with all these big voices, all these big players.
Yes.
So it's really, I would say like it's a two-sided approach. You want solid evergreen content with personal anecdotes, personal stories to basically grow your audience, and then for your brand itself, you're going to want to do the social listening, see what's trending, and build content around that.
I like that a lot. It is, and it's like there is a balance to everything, because certainly, you know, I have a YouTube that I do with my daughter, and it's kids content, but educational, and I could for days make the things that just I want to make, but then we might be missing out on things. And so she'll come in and like, hey, let's do this. And I'm like, what is that? Like, what is this trend that you're talking about? But then we find out that we can at least adapt it and make something that is going to be kind of both, a little bit of evergreen, but also focuses in on the trends that people are talking about. So I mean, there is that give and take that you can have between two sides. It's interesting too because you see the people that there are some people that really niche down, like this is for my daughter, she watches a couple creators that are just like all they do is Minecraft videos. Like that is their thing. And then, one of my favorites is this Chef Nick guy that she watches, and we enjoy some videos together. And he cooks awesome, inspiring meals for chefs, yeah, for celebrities and stuff. And it's wild. And he'll do all these different challenges. But it's very niche. He's not trying to vlog. He's not talking about his travels, but he does get other things. If he's traveling, he's cooking for someone. Do you think it's really better for creators to kind of try to stay broad, or do you think niching down is a really good option?
I would say, niching down within a specific vertical is a good option because, with the amount of years the internet's been around and the amount of websites that have dominated the space. I mean, you have really big brands in almost every single, uh, subject you can think of at this point.
Yeah.
But it's really about niching that down. So I would say, like, for example, there's, well, let's just say focus on the pet industry, for example. It's really hard to, go against like some of the big brands that have websites and blogs like Petco or PetSmart or something like that. Um, but I have seen, where that's of course more general. So if you want to run like a pet site, you're going against these big
Yep.
players.
Yep.
So let's say, for example, you'd have to probably sit there and focus. Okay, maybe let's focus on a single animal, and then focus on a single breed. So, for example, like I own a Shiba Inu, and there's very few sites that I find that seem to be doing pretty well. That give me the kind of advice when I need to, learn some training tips because it's a very stubborn breed that I have. Learn some training tips, learn like proper dieting. Uh, you know, really learn a lot of things that sometimes you won't even find on these bigger websites. So basically, I would say there's definitely a place to really focus on a niche, uh, but you really have to do a lot of that the competitor analysis. You have to do a deep dive because also it's silly to say, but you also have to find what you're passionate about. If you're passionate about video games, for example, and you see the money and all the audiences kind of gravitating towards, I don't know, financial websites. You're obviously not going to want to focus on a financial website. You want to lean into your passion if it is video games or if it's, pets. So I would say, unless you have a really big idea that is in a general sense, and, I hate to say it, you have a big budget and big team, I'd say go for that. But if you're a very small team relying on freelancers or just relying on yourself, I know plenty of people who are a writer, editor, designer, developer, and they just run their own stuff. That's when you might want to niche it down. Because niching it down, there's sometimes niches that there's only 3 sites in that space.
Right.
Or there's niches that you can carve out yourself. You just have to really sometimes you have to niche down a niche. And
I like that.
yeah, so like even I use the example of like dogs, and Shiba Inu website. There's probably maybe not too many websites, if any, that might, for example, just focus on dieting for the specific breed, whereas other more niched websites on the dog would be like training and feeding and exercise routines and stuff like that. So there's a space for both, but you really have to know, I guess, where you're at in that journey and what you're able to bring, what you're working with in terms of a budget, a team, etc.
Yeah. There was a guy here that I knew in Vietnam named Ben. Ben was a cool guy. I knew him 20 something years ago when he was a teacher, and he was already a big guy then. He was a weightlifter in like not even just like minor. He was like Ben was big. Ben was like full blown, like, like competition weightlifting. And one of the things that he found is like as he started getting older, he's like, well, I'm not going to be competing forever, but I want to be able to help people stay healthy. So he was like, do I train? Do I do this? And suddenly he settled on, he wanted to open a restaurant. So he opened up this restaurant. And, he's like, well, this restaurant, like, there's lots of restaurants around. I don't want to compete with all these other restaurants. That's hard. So he said, what can I do that's special? And he's like, one of the things that he realized was he was really good with food prep, meal prep, diet, and like really figuring out calories. And he was like, well, there's a real need for people to like have calories counted for them, and they want to know how many calories they're doing. And this is way back before ChatGPT would tell you what meals to make, or he was doing it from the old school days and saying, you know what, he's putting everything on the labels, everything on there. And it was, what he found was that he got a huge following by niching down because there was no one else doing it. And even when they started copying it, he'd already established his brand. And so he niched early and he went really hard at it, and it was really awesome. And it was very successful for him. But one of the things that I was thinking about too is, when I think about the best creators, there's certain things and skill sets that I think about too, because people think creating content is all fun and games, but no one like flexes on Twitter about like the spreadsheets or the to-do lists that they did. You know what I mean? But yet there are skill sets that a lot of really successful creators have. But what do you think some of those are that separates just the people that are doing it for fun from the real, like the real people that are really crushing it?
Yeah, no, that's a very valid point. I mean, there is so much work behind the scenes that
Right.
most people won't see that, it
Never
can,
know.
you never know. And there's so much documentation that can go into planning content or creating content. There's a lot of spreadsheets involved, like you mentioned. There's a lot of strategy. Sometimes it really just starts off with, writing ideas down on a Google Doc
Yep.
and kind of spreading it out from there. And then, in order to really stay on track and organized, you need spreadsheets. You need to build out a content calendar, and sometimes, uh, it can take, especially if you're a smaller creator, it can take months just to lead up to a launch because all of
Yeah.
that behind the scenes work. And then also, of course, if you have, no, you're in a collaborative environment, or whether it's a team that you're directly working with, or it's a team of freelancers that you're speaking to across the world. There's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of meetings. There's a lot of figuring out, okay, how do we do this better than the rest of the competition out there?
Yeah.
How can we deliver content in a very unique way? So basically, all the behind the scenes work, it does involve, first ideating stuff, writing it down on a Google Doc. Sometimes I use a notebook. Sometimes I use a whiteboard still.
Right.
Uh, and just kind of listing out like maybe some ideas. Why is this going to be something that we should move forward with? And if we move forward with it, it goes through this whole other process.
Right.
With a piece of
People don't
content,
know
for
that.
example. Yeah, we have to go through various documentation for enhancing something for SEO purposes,
Yes.
for basically making sure that, if we send it out to an external writer, they're going to have all of the detailed descriptions on how to, inform the H2s. We have to figure out the meta description, the hummingbird and all these components, the imagery, it's even imagery itself. I mean, I think, a lot of people, and I think as time evolves, it's going to be more AI generated as it's progressing. But it really does like require a lot of planning, a lot of documentation, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of strategies. So I think the more you have of that in the background, the better. And then once you kind of have, like, at this point in my career, I have an established process. I have documentation I don't need to touch because it's basically the foundation for the rest that comes after. But if you're really starting off, you really need to get that foundation first. It's just the same way with a house. You need the foundation to build upon it. and then hopefully, it's stable. And so
Hopefully.
then it doesn't crumple under the weight of, the space we're in. But yeah, it's really a lot of, organization too. You're gonna be working in Google Drives or cloud storage. You're going to be sharing things with people. There's so much organization that just goes into running a website or having content really published live, whether it's video, audio, or written.
Yeah, there is so much. One of the things, like, if I had to think about skills of top creators and top, like, people in the field, people who are working in content, one of the things that I'm always struck by is the grit, like, that it requires. You we see Mr. Beast crushing it right now, but people don't realize he was grinding away, making content for years. And you talk about, like, brands that are like, we think that things just blow up overnight, but literally there are people that are just relentless. And that's one of the challenges, though, because when you're pushing that hard, burnout hits everyone. And based on your experience running campaigns and content calendars, what types of systems actually keep creators sane while posting consistently?
Yeah, that's perfect example too. Mr. Beast. I know he was making videos for 10 years and then recently just blew up and poured his passion into his project and eventually paid off. And I think that's kind of the crux of it, really, is that you have to have passion for really anything you're doing, obviously, but you have to have passion within the creative space. You have to really feel like you're waking up every day to deliver the best piece of content that you can. And I think, of course, depending on the vertical that you're in, I would say, for my space and your money, your life space, uh, our content is meant to connect people and help people. And I would say, that's really what kind of drives the passion on top of already being a passionate content creator. I think the fact that I like helping people and I want to be able to connect them to the resources and the information that they need, that's really what keeps it going. Whether it's in the finance space or the Drug Watch website that I work on now, there are people affected out there. There's people I personally know that are affected by some of these things that we talk about, people I speak to online, and sometimes they just don't know where to go. They're like, okay, once I type into Google, I have a headache, it tells you, you got 6 months to live. While that's not the case, we
Right?
want, yeah. So you can't trust Google as a doctor, but you can trust websites that are basically geared towards helping the people. It's basically the websites that have the experts that are writing this content, like I had mentioned earlier. So really, to avoid all of that burnout, for me personally, I just wake up knowing that, while it's content, while it's a passionate industry that I'm passionate about the industry I'm in, I'm passionate about the field, about the content.
Yeah,
It's really, the thing that keeps me going is being passionate about humanity, is
I
that
love that.
the content that we make is intended to help people that probably on the other side of the planet that I've never even met. So, of course, it would be a different answer maybe if I had worked on a, entertainment website. But for me, I love working in your money, your life space. So it's really about the humanity that, at the end of the day, that just keeps me pushing and coming up with new content ideas and, figuring out how we can best help and serve people.
I love that. My dad always talks about being part of the solution, not part of the problem. And that's one of the things that I told my wife. I'm reading this great book about, like, figuring out your one thing. What is the thing that you're doing that you're good at? And for each of us, we were in our families, we were thinking about that, and I talked to my daughter as well. And she's like, I don't know what mine is, and I was like, that's your job, is to figure out what that one thing is, and then once you figure it out, to how you can help the world with it. For me, I've always been a bit of an educator. I worked as an educator when I was young, and I got tired of educating in the classroom, not because I didn't like it, but because I couldn't reach as many people. And so for me, that was where the podcast was a place that I can start teaching on a larger level and make a difference, you know? And so I think when you can figure out what it is that you're trying to do and you can realize that even if you're making cooking videos, well, maybe someone didn't grow up with the ability to cook. You know, they didn't have the experience, or their mom just didn't get around to it, or their father didn't get around to it. You know, and if you can be part of like helping the world be a better place, man, it's so powerful. And again, that is again figuring out, it's like niching doesn't have to be about limiting things. It's all identification of what service can you provide? What knowledge do you have that people really need? Because if you want to go and make a personal finance website, well, maybe you should have some type of story to tell, some type of narrative that is interesting for people, whether it be you're the guy who paid off his student loan debts while working three jobs, or maybe it's that you're the super wealthy investor who can tell people advice about how they can grow their money even more. You like, if you have that thing that is already part of you and you can go and harness that, like, man, combining narrative, beautiful narratives and service is a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. I think, like you mentioned, if you're the person affected, or perhaps is the person that has a lot of knowledge about, how to get from point A to B, uh, and you don't share it. I think that's a huge disservice to probably not only yourself as a creator potentially, but also so many other people you can help. So I think
Yeah.
really at the core of really anything that we do as content creators, and it could be something like you said, like a cooking video. There are people that
Yeah.
don't have the ability to do that, or they don't know. Maybe they don't have the finances to, you know, make a big meal or take some cooking classes or even music, because I see the guitars on your wall. Even like they want to take music lessons. There's people out there who are putting out really good content on YouTube or other channels that help people learn that, because sometimes the barrier is the cost, whereas
Yeah.
the internet now is widely accessible everywhere and you can find anything now. So
Yeah.
I think you just have to really, focus in on that, is that everything behind it should have some humanity.
I love that. What's one piece of advice you'd give to your younger self if you were starting over in your career?
Sure. Um, I would tell myself that this is a ever changing and ever evolving market, field, industry. Uh, it's never going to stay linear for long. You're always going to end up probably on one path and then maybe find yourself on another. So I would say getting into, telling my younger self, if you're going to get into content creation, you're going to get into, working on websites and into editorial. It could evolve and it could change, but you're going to have to be open to those changes, those ebbs and flows. And a lot of the time, it's not dictated by, even a company you work for, or it's sometimes dictated by larger forces where the entire industry or technology or Google as a whole is just shifting the landscape where you have to evolve. And so I would say basically learn as much as you can within the space. So yeah, I would say when I was in my younger years, I was mostly focusing on writing and editing. For various different topics. But at that time, I would have told myself, look into public relations more, look into, understand CRO, look into email, paid, any kind of any space, because you never know what you're going to find yourself into. And I would say, doing a lot of public relations work right now, I would say a couple years ago, I wouldn't have fathomed that I would end up there, but I've come to learn that the best, public relations people often start off in content. So
Right?
yeah, which, I would have never figured that out, but until I have done it. But yeah, I would say just be prepared, to learn everything you can, be ready to change with the ebbs and flows of this industry.
I love that. Where can people find out more about you and find you and content about you?
Sure. So basically, you can find me on drugwatch.com. Find my contact information on there. Like I said, I serve as a senior editor and a public relations specialist for that website. If you want to look into my financial background, I also am a writer and editor for annuity.org and Retire Guide. I have a bio, several bylines on various content. So those are probably the two main spots you can find me.